Good afternoon. My name is Colonel George Washington, and I'm quite happy to have a chance to speak with all of you today. I have not had the opportunity to have gentle conversation with more respectable individuals for quite some time. I've been out in the frontier these past few months, well, these past few years, to be honest, dealing with the French and the Indian and the war that we have been fighting against them. Most recently, we have been successful in our endeavors, which is, tell you the truth, the first time in nearly 4 years I can actually say that. It's been a long conflict since 1754. We have done our best to protect the frontiers of Virginia. My responsibility has been as Commander-in-Chief of our forces here to keep off the French and the Indian and their attacks against our vulnerable backcountry. From the beginning, our goal was to take the Ohio Territory. The French incursions there were unacceptable. Unfortunately, we have not been successful until just now, in December of 1758. I have just returned from that place with an expedition led by General Forbes. We have finally reduced Fort Duquesne, the French stronghold there, and have brought the Ohio Territory, for the time being, under control of the British forces. I have returned now here to, of course, speak to the governor on various matters, ensure that he knows what has been going on in the frontier, and to bring the citizens of Williamsburg to a general sense of peace, knowing that their backcountry will be protected. I wished to give everyone an opportunity to question the Commander-in-Chief of Virginia's forces. Formerly the Commander-in-Chief. There are now 2 individuals leading the various regiments, myself and Colonel William Byrd. But as I have been responsible for most of the frontier defense since '54, I thought it is my prerogative to speak with each and every one of you, to provide you an opportunity to question me in whatever ways you find necessary, whether it be matters of military tactics, the experience of what has gone on, the civilians who have suffered in the frontier, my own, at times, struggles to ensure the protection of those good people, and whatever else may come to mind. I am happy to engage with you. If you wish to speak on private subjects, please understand that I will be more than willing to speak on those matters, but with care. Take that into account, if you don't mind. So, without any further ado, the time is yours to question myself. What can I do for each and every one of you?
Colonel, thank you for making time to speak with us today. We were wondering, what's the current state of the frontier?
That is a complicated issue, so I will be as brief as possible. Currently, the frontier is still a dangerous place. So any who wish to return to their homes, I would advocate caution. Currently, Winchester is the new line of our frontier. Anything west of that has effectively been emptied by the ravages brought down by the French and their Indian allies. Currently, it is not the safest place, but now that Fort Duquesne has fallen in the Ohio Territory, I suspect things will return to some semblance of normalcy. At least, that would be my hope.
Thank you, sir. Eldon has asked if you have always thought of yourself as a natural-born leader.
I always thought of myself as a natural-born leader. Well, that is a difficult thing to reflect upon without sounding totally arrogant, but I will do my best to not to sound arrogant, but to answer the question. In some ways, no, and I suppose in some ways, perhaps. My childhood is one of forced responsibility. My father died when I was 11 years old, and when that occurred, I was effectively the eldest member of my household. My mother, myself, and 3 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. I had 2 elder half-brothers, much older than I, who, of course, could take that position of leadership and responsibility, but they had their own families to care for. So in many ways, the weight of responsibility for leading my family under my mother's watchful eye fell to me. So perhaps natural-born is not the correct way to put it, but circumstances forced me into that position. As time went on and I experienced and grew and matured, sometimes slower than I would have liked, and most certainly slower than my mother probably would have liked at times, I have had opportunities to test leadership in different capacities. First, by following. In my time as a surveyor in the frontier, I learned alongside and watched other surveyors first, and then became a lead surveyor myself. Militarily, it's much the same. My brother Lawrence was an adjutant general for the militia in Virginia. I watched and learned from him, and then when my turn came to have that position, I followed in those footsteps. Militarily, my first command was not truly an individual command. I was subservient. I was second in command to a Colonel Fry in our expedition to Fort Necessity. Some of you may know a bit about that. And then I had leadership thrust upon me in that circumstance, from lieutenant colonel to colonel, at the unfortunate death of Colonel Fry. So, natural born, perhaps, forced to take that position due to circumstances around me? Most certainly, yes. Willing to take that position? If the responsibility is required, I will do what I must. What other questions, perhaps?
Thank you, sir. Gary has asked if you believe that you can hold the frontier against the French.
If you had asked me that a few years ago, the answer would have been an emphatic no. I feared our success. Just now, yes, I think we will be able to stave off the French and the Indian from this point moving forward. Before this time, Virginia's forces were in a significantly deteriorated position. We lacked the number of men necessary to defend an expansive frontier. We lacked supplies. We lacked provisions. We lacked a spirit of patriotism among certain elements in the colony. Now that we have enough food, pay for the men, enough soldiers in the regiments, and enough British support, we should be able to stave off the frontier incursions any longer. Time will tell. If we waver in our resolve, if we weaken our attempts in any way, I strongly suspect that we could return to the situation we had been in before.
Colonel, shifting gears a bit, there have been several questions in regard to your future. Specifically, Denise is asking if you were looking forward to returning to your home. She says lovely wife and farming, but I think I am to understand that you're not quite married yet?
That would be correct. I am not, as you put it, quite married yet. I'd like to know where Denise finds her information. I've been busy in the frontier, and rumors apparently precede me. Yes, I am looking forward to returning to Mount Vernon, which has become my home. Well, I hope it to become my home. I have not been there very often the past few years. I've been a bit busy in the frontier. Obviously, my home has been mostly Winchester, if you could call it a home. So I look forward to returning to Mount Vernon, to relative peace, perhaps one day, to turning my eyes to other endeavors, caring after the estates, farming, etc. I also am looking forward to the future marriage to a certain lady. You perhaps may be familiar with Miss Martha Dandridge Custis. She and I have been in conversation for quite some time, since the early spring, late winter. I have not seen her since June? No, May? I cannot remember. It's been a while. And we will, if she continues to desire it, hopefully in the new year, join our two houses, one with the other. So yes. Next question, please, off the private subject, if that's quite all right with you.
Thank you, Colonel.
No, my pleasure.
Daniel asks how your faith makes you a better leader and person.
He's probably been listening to Samuel Davies, I think. Good. How does my faith make me a better leader? Well, militarily, I will put it in this one very specific point. And I will use an example from the past to highlight this. I served at a place called Monongahela. Some of you probably read it in the papers. I was there with a large army in the middle of 1755, June, July. Our purpose at that time was to take the Ohio, as we have just now done. I was serving with a man by the name of General Braddock, and that conflict, unfortunately, did not go as planned. There was a horrific defeat suffered, one with a great deal of loss of life. Of our roughly 1,200 men at that conflict, nearly half of them were killed and wounded, which is not good numbers. Roughly 450 killed, roughly 500 wounded. In that conflict, the officer corps was decimated, 80% casualties. Many good men cut off in their prime, many more injured beyond ability to function. A friend of mine wrote to me and said that the fact that I had come out of that conflict unscathed made him wonder if perhaps Providence had some future planned for myself and the others who survived. And the answer to that question is yes, of course. So from my faith standpoint, whatever faith each and every one of us holds is between us and our Creator. In my case, I see Providence guiding and directing each and every one of our steps, both those who live and those who die. So yes, did my military experience, did a belief in that divine providence watching over us allow me to be a better soldier? Yes, because if I survive, then I live another day to do my stated purpose. If I die, well, then my time had come to a close. Someone else would take my place. As far as leading men in that position, if one's commanding officers carry that conviction, then the thought is that perhaps then the men will follow in that place, both officers and enlisted. Beyond that point, any belief system that I hold, I keep as a private holding for myself, one that I do not normally speak on publicly. What else?
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Shane has asked how you achieved your position as surveyor with Lord Fairfax.
Well, through patronage. Any young people who wish to further themselves in community, I strongly suggest you find an influential, kind, and well-respected individual of community to help you rise through the ranks of society. The Fairfax family, specifically Lord Fairfax, have been that for me throughout my life. Lord Fairfax is a very wealthy landowner holding a great deal of property, not only in the northern neck, but deep into the Shenandoah Valley. In 1748 and into 49, I had the opportunity to go on a brief expedition with some surveyors who were doing work for him in that area. I was not a surveyor at that time. I was simply joining it, a bit of a lark, one could say. And I took to the frontier life, I took to surveying, and became quite fascinated with it. Now, when I was younger, I had done some work as a surveyor in my books, not as a surveyor, but done some school mathematical exercises. So I was familiar with the concepts necessary. So Lord Fairfax, through his kindness, through my brother Lawrence and Lord Fairfax's cousin William Fairfax, they achieved for me the appointment to county surveyor, for the county of Culpeper. And that was in 1749. 48? 49. It's been a few years. And from that point forward, I immediately went out to the frontier and began surveying, and did so from 1749 all the way until 1752 as a career. Without his influence, I doubt that I would have been able to attain that position with my own merit. So those connections have served me well, and I strongly suggest that those of you who wish to further yourselves would find a similar patron.
Riley, age 9, asks, how old were you when you went to war?
Well, Riley, 9 years old is what you said. The first time I experienced combat, let me see, that would have been 1754. It was in May, so I would have been 22 years old. I was not very old, not very young, kind of in the middle, I suppose. There are those who were with me who had been serving in previous conflicts who were much older, and some younger. But I was 22 when I first tasted true combat for the very first time. When I became Commander-in-Chief of Virginia's forces the next year, I was 23. A lot of responsibility for someone so young, don't you think, Riley?
Thank you, sir.
Oh, my pleasure.
Continuing to speak on the war, Brian has asked, what were your first thoughts when Half King took the actions he did against Jumonville?
What were my first thoughts at Jumonville Glen with the actions of Half King? Well, that would require a bit of reflection that I have not quite done recently, so I will do my best to do credit to what my circumstances at the time were. My first thoughts were to return to Governor Dinwiddie a letter expressing the situation, assuring him of the part that we had played in it, and making sure that there was no question of the importance of our actions. For those who are unfamiliar with Jumonville Glen, which I doubt is many of you, seeing as it's been in the papers for the past 4 years, we were out in the frontier in 1754 to prevent the French from moving into the Ohio Territory. At this small skirmish, hence named Jumonville Glen, there was a party of French soldiers who had been near our position, some 5 or 6 miles away, and had been there for quite some time, scouting our position. And as I was convinced, and have been proven since then correct, that they were returning information to the French in preparation for an assault upon us. We were also outnumbered, at least 4 to 1, if not more. So any opportunity that came to carve off part of the French forces was one that we would take. Jumonville was the man in charge of that particular expedition. And he was, unfortunately, we did not know that he was there. We were actually chasing another man, Monsieur Laforce, who was a very intelligent and very influential French officer of that region. We thought we were attacking his party. Half-King had been threatened by Monsieur Laforce, as had we. So the attack was upon a hostile French force, and the response was because they had burned one of our forts a few weeks beforehand. During the unfortunate scuffle, Jumonville was killed, and Half-King played a part in it. And the truth is that the response to Governor Dinwiddie was that the skirmish had occurred, that these Frenchmen had claimed to be a peaceful party, but all evidence that I had spoke to the contrary. So those were my thoughts on the subject.
Sir, McKenna asks, in what ways do you find British tactics particularly formidable in the context of the frontier, and in what ways are they a disadvantage?
A very good tactical question. Thank you. They have good things and bad things about them. I'll use Braddock's defeat as an example. Typical British tactics, as most people understand them, are very linear. Lines, columns, driving forces, etc. They have their uses. The discipline that it requires is important. The control it exerts of the battlefield, the sense of fear it can instill upon your enemy. And I will be perfectly candid with you, had succeeded several times in that expedition to that point. We had not been attacked by the French or the Indians, other than small pecking maneuvers, for lack of a better word. Unfortunately, we became very spread out in that column. And the disadvantage became very clear once the French and the Indians had enveloped our position on 3 sides. Not that tactics failed necessarily, although that was part of the issue. But more significantly, we lost the driving force of the tactics. The army requires officers to lead their men, the head of the snake, for lack of a better word, directing, consistency, discipline, representing a positive and proper example to the men to follow. At Braddock's defeat, we lost most of our officer corps within the first 15 to 20 minutes of the conflict. Therefore, the men were leaderless, and that discipline, that meticulous practice and preparation of consistently standing firm together and delivering regimented fire into an enemy fell apart. Instead of 2 and 3 deep, the men were 12 and 15, throwing their fire away, willy-nilly, without any care to a target. Someone might see a head pop out from behind a tree, and instead of 1 man firing, 40 would loosen their guns, only then to be attacked from a different standpoint. The tactics broke down once the discipline had been eroded. Conversely, Indian tactics, Indian fighting, I have trained my men in the Virginia frontier, and that is a useful and effective maneuver because it is hard-hitting, it is quick. You can spread out, you can move beyond various areas, you can ensure that your enemy has a difficult time pinning you down. But it only works if they don't come to grips with you. So my men in the regiment have been trained in both forms of fighting, both Indian fighting in pairs, individually, as well as in conventional tactics. And those combination of the two, as in any army, are absolutely necessary. One tactic will never be successful. One must use multiple tactics in a conflict and not rely simply on one thing. And also ensure that your officers, if they are removed, someone else is prepared to take their place to ensure that discipline continues moving forward. It's a very good question, McKenna.
Sir, we have had 2 questions that I think might lend themselves together.
Of course.
Barbara has asked what your greatest lesson from your time in the military has been, and Jamie has asked the most important quality in a leader.
Most important quality in the leader, and what's the most important lesson I have learned? Well, we'll start with the important quality of a leader, I think, first. One must lead by example. One must lead in a way that others are willing to follow. In my case, I find it difficult for me to conceive of asking my men to do something that I myself am not willing to do. That is, I think, paramount. What's the most important lesson that I have learned? There are times to hold your tongue, as well as the fact that it is the actions of a man that dictate their worth, not the position that they hold. I've told my officers this several times, that they must carry themselves in a way that shows responsibility, shows their worth, not simply trust in the title that has been bestowed upon them. A man's quality, whether it be an officer or an enlisted man, is dictated by what they do, not by who they say they are. And that has become, I think, very important, not just for me, but for my soldiers in general.
Sir, there are a few questions about your domestic life. Aaron has asked if you have any sisters.
Yes, I do. I have one, Betty. She lives in Fredericksburg. I do have one sister. She's younger than I am. She says that she's smarter than I am, but we'll leave that to where it is.
Bethany has asked who is living at Mount Vernon at this time.
Well, up until recently, my brother, John, and his wife, they have been taking care of the place for me in my absence, and have been very kind to do so. They've been married a few years ago and did not have a home of their own constructed just yet, so they've been working on that. And in the meantime, they've been watching over Mount Vernon. Although he informs me that there's practically no furniture in the house, so I have a few things to do before I take myself back up there in January or later.
Jessica has asked, sir, she has heard that you're a great dancer and wonders if it's true.
I believe I should leave that to the ladies I dance with to tell me whether I'm a great dancer or not, but that has been something that I've been asked a great deal. I enjoy dancing. I enjoy the athletic aspects of it. I enjoy the social parts. It allows me to move freely about the room without feeling the constraints of as much societal expectation. So yes, I enjoy dancing a great deal, and I hope that I'm deserving of the title of a good dancer.
I mean no offense by this next question, sir, but Lois has asked if you ever lose your temper.
Do I ever lose my temper? Yes. I have been known to at times become overwarm, especially when I feel that something is not being done the way it should be done. When I was younger, Lord Fairfax, in fact, wrote to my mother telling her that she told me that he had done this, hence why I know. But the one thing I needed to work on was my temper. I have been doing my best to control it as much as possible. I feel things very deeply, both not just anger, but just in general. I have a very strong, passionate sense of responsibility. And so at times my passions have gotten the better of me. But I hope that now, as I've been serving in more public service, that as these few years have gone on, I've learned to use it to better effect as opposed to being driven by those passions.
Several people have inquired as to your favorite meal, and one in particular has asked if you've ever tried ice cream.
My favorite meal? Well, and I've had a few times the frozen ice in my life, yes. Favorite meal, good heavens. Well, normally, anytime recently, whatever I could get. The frontier, we have been struggling with provisions for quite some time, so we have not eaten as cleanly as I would have liked. I enjoy a hearty meal. Ham is a particular favorite of mine. Oysters, when I can get them. I've become quite fond of just common hoe cakes, mostly because of the experience in the frontier, needing to eat something. It's a bit more of a common fare, but in a pinch it will do. So I cannot say a specific meal just now that stands out to me, but those are the few things that that come to mind. Oh, a bear is very good. I've had that quite often in the past few years.
Denise has asked for you to tell us a little bit about your uniform.
Oh, well, of course. The uniform is that of the Virginia Regiment, both the 1st and the 2nd Virginia Regiments. It is a bit reflective of the earlier part of the conflict. The other one that I had, the more updated one, is a bit dirty, as we've been in the expedition. But it is a very simple blue with red facings to identify us as provincial troops as opposed to regular British soldiers. The blue is simply a choice. We've been wearing it since 55. The red is a simple facing. You see variations. These are very large cuffs. Some of the common soldiers will use more of a slit cuff. The waistcoat is also to be scarlet. You cannot see them, I don't think, but the breeches are blue as well, and I'm currently wearing a legging of sorts to protect against whatever brush might be going on. There's another uniform that we wear, however, and it is a more conventional dress. Simply a trade shirt, much like the one that I'm wearing now, with green Indian leggings that come up to your mid-thigh as well as your breeches. It's much more comfortable in the summer and allows you to move with greater speed through the forest as our Indian, both enemies and allies do. So in public situations, I will wear this, and also because General Forbes ordered us to no longer wear the other as officers. But the men wear both these uniforms and also the Indian dress as well.
Sir, we've had a few more questions in regard to your military service.
Yes.
In particular, your interactions with the American Indian tribes. Andrew has asked, what American Indian tribes have you encountered in the Ohio Territory and what your experiences were with them?
Of course. The tribes are quite a few. The nations, 6 nations first, the Iroquois and their various divisions, one of them being a subset, the Mingo, the half-king who was spoken of a few moments ago, Jumonville Glen. He's the leader of that particular group. The Shawnee, the Delaware, both find their residence in the Ohio Territory. The Shawnee, actually, not just the Ohio, but other places as well. But they have been a primary, both ally for a short time and enemy the past few years. Shawnee, Delaware, the Mingo. Let's see, what others come to mind? Cherokee, the Catawba as well from the south. They are our allies as opposed to our enemies. A few other nations that are smaller and have been subsumed into other groups whose names escape me at the moment. But those are the primary individuals that I can speak of. As far as the engagement with them, I find them to be a very wise people, very shrewd, and are terrifying opponents and essential allies. I have advocated many, many times to my commanders, both here in Williamsburg and also British officers, that we must ensure, as we fight in the frontier, we must ensure we have Indian allies upon our side, primarily the Cherokee and the Catawba. Without them, we will never be able to fight the enemy. They are born to the woods. They understand the conflict necessary, the tactics involved, the ground itself. And without their assistance, we have been proven to be unsuccessful time and time again. So they are formidable allies and even more terrifying enemies. I hold a great deal of respect for them.
Yolanda has asked, sir, your opinions on slavery.
Of course, Yolanda. I appreciate the question. I have been a slaveholder since I was 11 years old. When my father died, I inherited 8 individuals who fall under my care, but my mother has been obviously the one caring for them for quite some time. It is an economic reality of Virginia and one that I am a part of. As far as any other question beyond it, what I think perhaps there may be more of a question behind the question, I have not given it much thought the past few years, so I unfortunately cannot give you much more of a satisfactory answer than just that. I apologize.
We've had a few questions in regards to your political philosophy just now. Lois has asked if you think that the British should be able to tax the colonies.
Why not? I apologize. The question catches me off guard, not because it is a poor question, but because I have not thought in that regard. Of course, it is the government's responsibility to tax its people so that there are armies to protect you, so there are roads. The British Empire is one that has great influence here in the colonies. Obviously, we are a part of that great family. Now, as far as if perhaps the question is, should Britain tax us directly, well, that becomes more complicated. Politically, the House of Burgesses, Virginia's representative government here, they are the ones who levy taxes upon us. Instructions come to them from the king and the council. That comes to the House of Burgesses, and they, in turn, as I understand it, are the ones who then levy the taxes. So, in that sense, we are taxed by Great Britain. That is part of the reason why I have a career as a military soldier. I am paid for by taxation from Virginia. It's also part of the reason why we have struggled to defend the frontier, because the taxation and the amount of money brought in has never been enough to keep the men in the field. So until recently, when the British government has started bringing money to our cause and giving and helping assist with payment of the men in the field, we have struggled to field the men to begin with. So it is the responsibility, and I say responsibility, for that is the government's job to ensure the protection of people through fair taxation. Yes.
Greg has asked, sir, if you have noticed a change in your views on the rights of Virginia citizens.
Less rights, more opinions of. I have always seen myself as a loyal British subject, as I still am. I have given much of my life these past 4 years for the King, spending a great deal of time serving His Majesty's endeavors, both here in Virginia and also in the frontier. What I have been surprised by and disheartened by is the negative opinion that is sometimes laid upon colonial soldiers, provincials. There are many British officers who I have met who look down upon myself and my fellow Virginians, Pennsylvanians, Marylanders, New Yorkers, Massachusettsmen, as somehow inferior, primarily as soldiers. But it also, I see, has extended to us as citizens of His Majesty. And to me, that is a gross injustice. We all are subjects of the King. We all serve Him. My blood is red just as any other man's who dies in service of the King, whether they be Virginian or from London. That distinction gives me cause for concern. It is also part of the reason why I feel that I have never obtained a British commission in the regular British Army, because of my status as a provincial. So it is my belief that we provincials, both militarily and civilians, we must show the British who think in that way that they are wrong, be the exception to the rule, or show them that the rule is that we are equally as worthwhile, and that the exception are the few who are not. That is my opinion on that subject.
Sir, Deanna has asked, if you were not a soldier, what job would you want?
I would want to be a farmer. Yes, I would. I spent a great deal of time surveying, and I enjoyed that. It served a purpose to bring me finances and property for the first time when I was younger. But now that I have experienced the taste of adventure in the frontier, the intensity of combat, all elements of it, the pastime and the task that most excites me is the idea of farming. Returning to Mount Vernon at some point to lay down the musket and the sword and instead pick up the plowshare. I think if I had not joined the military, that's what I would have done, been simply a farmer. At one time, I thought perhaps the Navy, but my mother put an end to that, and I'm quite happy that she did. I get rather seasick at times.
Speaking of your mother, sir, Harvey has asked after her health.
Oh. When did I last hear from her? Last time I heard, she was fine, as strong-willed and insistent as always. My mother and I share a great many qualities. We both have a great deal of passion. We both are not afraid to express ourselves. And my mother, believe you me, if she was not well, I would have heard by now. And I would have been expected to come and see her. But she is well, as far as I can tell. And as soon as my business in Williamsburg is done here, I will take myself to Fredericksburg and call upon her to ensure that I'm not incorrect. She is well.
Speaking of one more lady in your life, Maggie and Leela, age 9, have asked, where did you meet Mrs. Custis?
Well, we met at some mutual friends of ours' home. Well, I suppose I should clarify. Our reacquaintance came at a mutual friend's home, the Chamberlains, out in New Kent County. Mrs. Custis and I had met a few years ago. I cannot exactly remember when it was, but it was before the war started. I was acquainted with her and knew about her. She was a great lady of quality and had just married around that same time as well to her first husband, Daniel Park Custis. We met at the Chamberlain's house through the kind machinations of some friends of ours. I was here in Williamsburg seeing a doctor. I was quite ill at the time and feared for my life. She had not been in Williamsburg, as I understand, very much, and had been mostly in the frontier. Not the frontier, good grief, I'm mixing my life with hers. She'd been mostly staying to her home in New Kent County, and the Chamberlains convinced her to come to the house. Mr. Chamberlain convinced me to do the same, and the two of us, unbeknownst to each other, ended up in the same place at the same time. And from there, a conversation that lasted many hours took place, and since then, many more conversations, letters, correspondence back and forth, until finally we decided to join our two houses together. She kindly condescended to allow us to join our two houses together. Her position in society is far above mine. Anyway, that is how the two of us met.
Sir, Michael and several other people have asked if you have experienced any injuries.
No. I am quite fortunate that I have escaped physical harm from the enemy. With some exception, I have been quite ill several times throughout this conflict. I have had several fevers. I've had flux many times. What's the word the doctors use for it? It starts with a D. Dysentery, I think. Anyhow, you don't want to know the subject, the details of it. Ask someone if you wish to know what it's about. So no, though I have escaped physical harm in combat, I have not escaped disease these past few years. I'm currently fairly recovered for the moment, but one never knows. It comes seasonally, it seems.
We've had several questions about your education, sir. Wendy would like for you to talk a little bit about the manor book that you copied, and Chuck asks, what type of education would you recommend for children?
Good. The manor book in question, the rules on civility and proper behavior, was an exercise that my mother had me do when I was younger to ensure penmanship. And in that were a list of rules, things that a gentleman or gentle lady of quality should do in proper society. A few such examples are things like don't pick your teeth in public, don't sit too close to the fire, two more philosophical behavioral patterns. Give proper recognition to those who are better than you. If you are seated down in a room and someone walks in, whether they be your inferior or your superior, rise to greet them. The final one that stands out in my mind is do not, keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire known as conscience, those sorts of things. Good rules for behavior. For me, a written exercise to practice penmanship, one that I needed. and some, also in some ways, one that exercise instilled some of those qualities in my mind. There are times now that I do not say I necessarily live by them, but by having gone through that rote memorization and practice, they unintentionally or intentionally inform some of my behavior to this day. The other question was my schooling that I would recommend for other young individuals. As much as one can acquire. I unfortunately did not have a great education. My studies effectively ended from an official standpoint when my father died. My two elder brothers, Lawrence and Austin, they had the opportunity to go to England for school. Many other young people are able to go to colleges here in the colonies, William and Mary, etc. I did not have that chance. I learned by doing more than by sitting under the tutelage of other individuals, and I feel that lack. I have no other languages that I can speak. French would have been very helpful the past few years. I do not have the greater thinking of philosophy, of the great men of learning, of sciences, etc. I have more of a practical education. And so for those who have the opportunity to better themselves in their minds, I strongly encourage them to do so. Education is a way that opens many doors for you, and it is much more difficult to proceed in life without that learning. I think it is essential.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Kevin, as well as Jennifer's 5th grade class, has asked, is there someone you look up to who is your mentor?
Yes. 2 or 3 people, I think. First, my half-brother Lawrence, in his life, he was a great influence to me. A father figure of sorts. He instilled the importance of responsibility in caring not just for oneself, but for one's family. And in that light, also my mother, she instilled those same virtues, the necessity of practicing discipline and responsibility and expectations that are placed upon you. And also the Fairfax family, particularly Lord Fairfax and Colonel William Fairfax. Without the 2 of them, I would not be where I am just now. Unfortunately, Colonel Fairfax passed away in 1957, so I miss his steadying and calming hand a great deal. But those 3, the Fairfax, Lord Fairfax, Colonel Fairfax, my brother Lawrence, and of course my mother.
Sir, Jessica asks, do you think there could ever be a peace or alliance with France?
No. Why would there be? We are their enemies and they are ours, and that is the way it has always been, and I suspect the way it always will be.
Sir, this is our final question.
Of course.
We have had several people ask about your hopes for the future of the country. And we were hoping you could speak upon that.
Of course. And my hopes for Virginia are that we return to a place of peace. This war is not over yet. We have quite some time before it will come to a close, I suspect, I fear. Thankfully, because of the control that we have exerted in the Ohio Territory, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania should be safe for the time being, barring unforeseen circumstances. So that is my hope for Virginia, a return to peace, a return to safety in the frontier, a return to our practices in times of normality, a return to farming, a return to business, a return to a healthy, surviving economy, and not constantly fearing the attack that have been coming so often for the past few years. For His Majesty and the greater empire at large, I hope much the same. I fear that the war will go on for a few more years. I do not think that we will have much peace for at least 2 or 3 more. The French are, I suspect, nearly spent in Canada. I think the theater of war here will come to a close very quickly. But in Europe, on the high seas, who knows? 2, 3 more years? 4 more? It's hard to say. But I hope that we will return once again to peace. For myself, this is the last time you will speak to me as an active colonel. This afternoon I have a meeting with His Excellency at the Governor's Palace to resign my commission, both to him, the Governor's Council, and the men of the House of Burgesses. So I will no longer be serving in a military capacity. Hence the reason I wish to give you all to have a chance to ask me questions in that regard before your opportunity is gone. Personally, I will return to Mount Vernon. I will become a farmer. I am prepared to move forward into a life of peace. I will be serving as a member of the House of Burgesses, assisting Virginia in a more political way, I suppose, as opposed to a military way. And I confess that I am uncertain how that will go. I am not particularly experienced with the machinations of politics other than receiving some of its complexity in my time as Commander-in-Chief. And I am hopeful of a peaceful retirement for myself, and I never plan to take up the sword again if I can help it. And that is my hope for myself, for Virginia, and for the empire at large. And I hope also for each and every one of you. Your kindness and your questions have been very, very appreciated. I thank you for your allowing me to be delicate in private matters and yet still be willing to ask those questions. I hope that we will meet again in happier circumstances, now that this war is coming to a close, that you will once again be able to travel safely upon the roads and see your friends and family. And one day, perhaps, if you have any further questions, once I've been in the government for a few years, or months, or years is better, honestly, years would be better, I will know how to properly help you in a different way. Until that time, I am your humble servant, Colonel soon to be retired Colonel George Washington. Good day, friends.